Welcome to Colourful, a podcast where we explore how race shapes our experiences. I'm Stacy Jane, a white woman and mom of two living in Cape Town, looking to challenge the systems of privilege.
And I'm Sena a black woman living in Johannesburg, passionate about interrogating power dynamics and the intersection of identities. Our vision: to spark candid and open dialogues for a more inclusive South Africa.
We're not afraid to have uncomfortable conversations because we believe that complacency only perpetuates injustice.
Ultimately, we aim to bridge divides through empathy and understanding. Sometimes we laugh, sometimes we cry, but at least we're doing it together. Welcome to Colourful.
So today I want to talk about something that has been a source of frustration for me as a parent, and that is about exposing my children to racially diverse and inclusive toys and books. My daughter Faith, I have endless options of white dolls and Barbies for her to choose from, but it's really a lot harder for me to find dolls of color. And actually when I do, often their features are not accurate or realistic. So I can find a dark-skinned doll, but she's going to have long, straight brown hair, which is not representative of her in the toys that she's playing with. And for my son David, he is hugely into superheroes. And while I can most certainly now see more superheroes of color emerging, I think Black Panther was the first time that I actually saw a superhero movie where the lead character was black. And this extends into so many other spheres of their lives. Like, I challenge you, our listeners, to find an elf on the shelf that is of color and not white. And it's really hard. And actually, at this point, I kind of want to shout out to my friend Jax, who went on a massive hunt to find me an elf on the shelf of color for my children so that they didn't believe that Father Christmas only interacted with white elves. So the point is, it's important for children to be exposed to toys and books that show positive depictions of people who look like them. And actually, even more than that, it's important for all children of all races to be exposed to the toys that reflect diversity of the world that they live in.
Yeah, Stacey, I can relate to this. I'd say that, like, growing up, I can think of very few instances where, like, my books or my toys depicted people of color. Now, this was like in the early 2000s. The cartoons I watched were overwhelmingly white. The movies I watched were overwhelmingly white. But I can remember specific instances where I did see people that looked like me, and those moments, they stayed with me. And recently I met the very talented media personality, Hulisani Sisi Ravele, at a work event I went to a few weeks back. And it was so surreal seeing her because I was glued to YoTV as a little kid. But I remember being about 6 and trying to convince my mom to let our family move to Johannesburg so that I too could host YoTV after school like Cece. And looking back on it now, I think that this is why the essence of why representation is so important, because through Cece, seeing someone that looked like me, right, I started to view this as very attainable for me too. And I think of it now, and I think of the implications. What if Cece had been a white girl? I don't know that I may have resorted to drastic measures to try convince my mom to let our family move so I could secure my big city break. My mind wouldn't have even thought that's a possibility, perhaps.
Yeah, Sena, and that's why today we want to explore the importance of representation in the stories that we tell our children. I guess not even the stories that we explicitly tell them, but also the stories that they learn based on what we expose them to through books, movies, teachers, mentors, friends. So to help us discuss, challenge, and consider the stories we tell our children is best-selling author and founder of 12 Animation Studios. Her critically acclaimed children's books include How Many Ways Can You Say Hello and We Are One, and they've earned her a place alongside Enid Blyton's The Enchanted Wood in South African homes. In fact, our producer, Laura, and I, we've spoken at length about how this author's books have inspired conversations between us and our children at bedtime, and for that, we're really thankful. Of course, you know that I'm talking about none other than Refiloe Moahloli.
Thank you for having me. I'm excited to be part of the conversation.
Amazing. Refiloe, I think I told you already that I feel a little bit starstruck. I'm so excited to have you on here, and I'm just so keen for the discussions that we're about to have. But before we jump into that, please, could you tell us a little bit about your journey, and more specifically, how you made the leap from corporate to author of children's books?
Yeah, I think my writing journey started with my reading journey. I was like a huge bookworm when I was young. And that's the one thing that was consistent throughout my life. It was a life full of change, but that was always consistent. So, when I was in varsity and seriously considering what I want to do with my life, because what I applied for was just like semantics and just logistics, you know, I just wanted to get inside. But when I was seriously considering it, I had a thought of, well, the one consistent thing has been me and my love for stories. It would be so amazing if I could share stories. So it was, I think, my second year of varsity where I kind of had that moment of, I want to write eventually. But I also was clear that, I mean, I'm on this, I was doing a BCom information systems, and I got a bursary from a telecoms company. So I was clear that it will start with, you know, obviously after getting the bursary, going to work there. But it was end game. Writing was always end game for me. And after, I mean, I did 3 years in South Africa, and then after the 3 years, I went on assignment for 2 years in India. And by the time that assignment ended, it felt like a good time to make that jump because of just the period of my life. I felt like if I don't do it now, I'll never do it. Yeah, so it's that was the kind of meander to it. But writing for children was really personal. It was essentially, I'm now in the writing journey and spending time with my nieces that I'd missed in those 2 years, and seeing how the situation was. I really wanted to write a book for them that they can resonate with, and also that celebrates who they are and where they come from. So yeah, it started with that first book, and then I just didn't stop.
And I'm so
Powerful.
glad you didn't stop, because your books are really just such a special thing to have in our home as we tell our children stories. And one of my favorites is How Many Ways Can You Say Hello, which is about a little girl who's been exposed to diversity in her new school, and she goes on this curious journey to discover all the ways that you can say hello in the official 11 languages. So what inspired you to write this particular story?
And that's the first story I was talking about. It was observing my nieces kind of starting school. So when they were at home, before they start preschool, whatever, they still exposure to their mother tongue. So the eldest, there's 4 years between them. The eldest started preschool at 18 months. So in those 18 months, she was exposed to isiZulu, which is her mother tongue. So she picked it up, you know. So by the time she went to school, she had picked up the language. Difference with her sister, she started school at 4 months. Just, I mean, as soon as her mom, you know, went back to work, and now she didn't have the same experience of being exposed to her mother tongue as much, and therefore she didn't pick up the language as much as her sister did. So I was kind of, yeah, concerned by that, just because of the changing environment that we're living in, how much are our kids missing out on their mother tongue, you know. So I wanted it to also be something that's fun for the kids to say, okay, cool, we come to school, and let's say for them particularly, they went to an English medium preschool. We come to school from different places. Yes, we're being taught in English, but what do we come with? What's the language that we come with? And at the very least, we should be able to greet each other in, you know, in our mother tongue, whatever your mother tongue is, at the very least to learn hello. So that's where the concept of hello came from. Also, I have an aunt of mine who, she speaks 6 of the 11 languages, a lecturer, and she was inspirational for me in the sense that she would say, when she's lecturing, she lectured at Forte, and you get people from all over the country that go to Forte. So she would say to them, you know, I instruct in English, that's part of the job, but because I speak 6 of the 11 languages, chances are if there's something you didn't get in English, you can come to me after the class. Chances are I'll be able to explain it in your language. So it was a combination of the conversation I had with her on that, and observing what my nieces were going through, where I was like, goodness, at the very least, we should be able to greet each other in all the official languages. But that's where the concept really came from.
I think that's so powerful. And I have a similar story in the sense that as my parents gained upward mobility, they moved us to the suburb. But at the time in which we were now more in, like, closer proximity to whiteness, I'll be blunt. I have a very different experience in acquiring English than my siblings do, in the sense that I started going to school at 2 years old. Their journeys, they were already at 6 with a better grasp of the language. And it would have been massively helpful to have books that reflected people that look like me. So that's amazing. I want to ask you, Earlier, like as I was reading some of your books, I felt as though they were gently yet very firmly challenging the status quo. Why do you believe that representation in children's literature is so important? And do you think it plays a role in combating racism, prejudice, and othering?
Yeah, I think at the core and the base of the stories I write is representing reality, representing actual life. So a book like How Many Ways Can You Say Hello? We do have, I mean, now it's 12 official languages in this country, and there's so many other languages that are spoken. So what I depicted in the story is a reality. It's not something, like completely out of there. So I think for me, when we talk about representation, maybe we can add more accurate representation, a more accurate representation of how the world actually looks. My stories in particular come from a place of truth. This is someone's reality. And the more realities we show, the closer we get to, in our stories and what we share and what's exposed to the outside is what actually is. So that's really the intention, is about better representing what the world actually looks like, which is in its diversity.
Earlier on, I spoke about, seeing someone that looked like me on TV, and then that made me like fueled into my like delusions that I could be on TV too. But experiences like that I find were few and far between as I was growing up. The representation was, as you said, like the realities are so different, but what we saw was one way,
Mm,
overwhelmingly so.
mm.
And I know I can speak for myself, but I'm so keen to hear from you based on your personal experience where you felt as though the lack of representation, either in the media or elsewhere, affected you or those around you, especially growing up?
So I think the first time it really kind of hit me hard, and less media. I don't think I was so aware as a child of what's happening in the media, even if I'm exposed to it, not consciously aware. So I grew up in Tata. So that was the first 10 years of my life. And that already, just the environment I was in, was already a very diverse school. I spent 2 years in a school here in Joburg, which was still quite diverse. When I went to Stellenbosch was when I really kind of met a world that I hadn't been exposed to. And I think the one thing, I mean, we can speak on race and all of that, and it all comes into play. But I think the other thing we shouldn't forget is the other things that children are dealing with, regardless of race or what's happening in society, which is just wanting to fit in, right? So I was in my teens when I moved. So it was high school when I moved to Stellenbosch. So the biggest thing that any child wants, I guess, in that time is to fit in. That's what you want to do. My boarding school, because I was in hostel, in grade 8, I was the only black kid in grade 8. And I mean, for people who've lived in boarding school, as much as you've got your school where there's more diversity in school, but if you live in hostel, hostel becomes home, right? That's the place where you spend the most time, and that's the first place you actually make friends. So that was quite hectic for me. I'd never experienced that in my life before, and I was like 13 at that time. So that was already like a shock to the system. And again, let's go back to the human being needs to survive ultimately, right? I'm at the school, so and I want to survive, I want to fit in. And because of that, then because maybe there weren't people with similar background to me, then I'm the one that has to fit in the environment I'm in. And as much as that in the beginning, it's a survival thing that any child will want to do, there is losing myself in it. It was also at the time that there are different things that are being managed in the school, right? So you have some kids, for instance, that come from, let's say, from like the township, and their primary school maybe was in a school where it's not like a English medium school of instruction, right? So there's maybe still learning the language English itself that they still working with and wanting to improve on, right? So and most of the kids at the time that I was there, actually most of the black kids did come. There's a township called Kayamani, they came from there. So I remember there were times when the teachers would say things like you can't speak Xhosa in certain places in the school, right? And yeah, like I say, there's many things being managed, right? I'm sharing one side of the story, but for me, if then you can't speak Xhosa in your school, and then now because I live at school, right? So I'm not going home. I'm going to hostel. So there's that rule, and then I go to hostel, and then there's no one to speak, at least not in my grade, no one to speak Xhosa to. So little by little, I'm speaking less of Xhosa, and I'm less exposed to others that speak Xhosa. And then so it's like micro things like that. And the more you want to fit in, and fitting in means speaking the language of the people that I'm with without realizing. And that's why we have to almost like, I'm speaking from an adult's point of view, reflecting. But this is a 13-year-old child. They, I'm sure there are many that are more aware and like more like, yeah, no, do you know what I'm saying? But I, for one, was not particularly like activism girl at 13. At 13, it was survival. So to look back, it's like, so it was little things. So then I stopped speaking his Xhosa. I stopped, like kind of expressing the things that maybe they do make me stand out, because of the environment in. I want to fit in. And the more I moved towards wanting to fit in, the less comfortable I felt in who I truly am and my background. And so that was when it had a big impact for me. So it was representation in my environment. As a child, these things aren't like consciously happening, where it's like, oh, now I'm no longer speaking Xhosa. Now I'm self-conscious about my hair. Now it's like little things that add up. And then later on, you're able to reflect. So anyway, I moved from the school, and I moved to a school that actually was actually predominantly Black. So I went from predominantly white to predominantly Black, but which gave me a very interesting balance in my life. But I needed that. And sometimes it's just like exactly what you said, just having people around you. It doesn't have to be everyone, right? Just having some people around you that have maybe similar backgrounds, similar cultures, similar languages that you can share make such a difference because we are all not one thing. At least let me speak for myself. I'm not one thing. For instance, Sena, you and I can have a shared history and things that will resonate between you and I. And for sure, Stacy, there are other things that from a human level, it's nothing to do about our race. We may share certain backgrounds because of our race or not. It may be about our love for cricket, as an example, right? I'm a huge cricket fan. And you and I, Stacy, might actually be very similar personalities, and we resonate from that point of view. But the more you actually have more diverse people around you, then you're able to see that I can resonate with people on different things. But it becomes difficult to accept certain parts of you when you're or at least you don't feel, particularly as a child, maybe something happens and you feel like you're not safe to express that part of you, and that's when it becomes dangerous. So if we can represent society as it is in its diversity in different ways, whether it's the school you go to, the things you listen to, what you watch, particularly for kids, because at that age they're so they're not me, at 36 in an environment that's not diverse. They're kids. And again, their main thing as kids, survival. So I will fit in as much as I can. So if we can keep that in mind, then I think we can better assist them even if, for instance, you do have a child that's maybe in a less diverse school, then to be aware that if maybe this environment is not so diverse for my child, what other environments can I expose them to where they can actually see that the world is not just what your school looks like. The world actually looks different. And you have to be intentional about that.
You do have to be intentional. That's such a valid point. And actually, I love what you just shared about a shared humanity. I remember in high school, I had a friend named Evidence, and my mom came to fetch me from school the one day, and she brought my younger sister Chloe with. Chloe was 7 at the time. Evidence and we must have been about 14. And Chloe, I came down from school, and Chloe said to me that her and Evidence are twins. So I asked why they're twins, knowing that there's like some very obvious reasons why they can't be twins, starting with age, ending with race. And she said, because we're both wearing jerseys.
I
And
love
I
that.
just love how
Yeah.
children, it's sweet, eh? I love how children view the world in a way that acknowledges our shared humanity way more than adults do. I mean, as a mom, I want to protect my children from how unfair and cruel and unaccepting the world can be, but I also need to be honest with them so that they understand the realities of the world that they're living in, and I can prepare them for those realities.
Yeah.
And so, I'm obviously often in bookstores looking for children's books. One of them I came across a couple of weeks ago was by Maxine Benaba Clark, which was it was titled "When We Say Black Lives Matter," and that addresses quite a heavy topic with children. Do you think there's a balance between protecting children's innocence while educating them about the realities of the world? And have you ever had to navigate that balance in your own writing?
Yeah, I think it's quite a personal thing. And speaking of diversity, going back to diversity, you have diverse authors with diverse backgrounds and motivations for writing and what they write about. And I think that's beautiful. We don't all have to write about the same thing, or come from the same place. And you might find that there's a place, a space for the types of books I write, and you might find that there's a place and space for those types of books, right? And so I can't say it's like it's not a black and white thing. I think it's what is needed for the moment, what is neat and by the person. For sure, we don't have the same kind of parents, right? Some parents might lean towards being more protective of their children until they really can't protect them anymore. Others might be like, you know what, best I show you the truth right now. It really just depends on that family and what their needs and how they view the world. I think diversity is such a big thing because you have diversity even within a family. Like, never mind outside
Right?
there, just within your own home. And you spoke about acceptance and what you expose to your children to the world outside, and the world may be unaccepting outside, even inside. um, and I think the more we recognize that even inside we have differences, even between a parent and a child, for sure, there are differences. Um, and instead of trying to hide those, highlighting that if you can have diversity within your own home, how much more outside of your home? How much more, so I think the conversation really starts there. And what you write and how like how strong it is in terms of language or context. It then goes towards that. It goes to preference, timing, context, when it works, and maybe there's some situations it won't work so well. And I guess being flexible with what you need for your environment is maybe the best way to go.
Yeah, I think
I
that's very
love that.
valid.
Like just acknowledging diversity and all its like nuances and its different facets. I mean, I
Mhm.
often say on this podcast that, I'm not here to be a representative of Black people because there isn't a singular way to be a Black person. And so
Mm,
even so interesting, the example that you said about even in families, there isn't one way to be a child of a family. There's
mm,
diversity even with that. But I want to look more to the future because I think over the years we really have seen sort of like an increase in racially and culturally diverse characters in children's toys and books,
mm.
thanks to authors such as yourself. But I want to know: do you think that we're making progress in this realm, or is there still a long way to go, or both?
So, for someone who 8 years ago, I stepped into the space and I was obviously doing a lot of research about what's currently happening in South Africa, what's available, do you get what I'm saying? So, if you ask me that question, as someone who started this 8 years ago, I feel like, wow, there has been a lot of progress. Um, so, and that's a big wow, you know? Um, but if you take now and look at what's possible, then of course there's still huge potential to still get even further. I, I think for our own encouragement, I think it's important to recognize the steps that have been made. You know, before you look at what is still missing, I think it's important to recognize the steps that have been made. Otherwise, it becomes like there's almost like a futility of what's the point, you know, like am I actually getting anywhere? And that kind of frustration won't work because the undoing that needs to happen took what centuries, it took so long. It's, you know, like there's so much that needs to be undone. It's generations and generations. So it may take as long to do the undoing, to do the unlearning, to do for us to get to the ideal place. Hopefully, if I get there, whatever ideal looks like, I think the more we are encouraging, the more we create, even in our energy. If you're getting me, the more we actually recognize, listen, we were there. We are now here. We still have there to go. But don't forget the journey that's actually already been made, because that's the energy and creativity to actually give you the boost forward. So, yeah, some people, like I say, some people who might get here now in 2024 might go to a bookstore and be like, for a country such as this, it's still not enough. Right? And they may have a valid point. I'm not even disputing that. I guess it's where you catch the progress. For me, I've been 8 years in this journey, and I have seen quite a bit of movement that I'm excited about. It excites me to how much more can we still do. Imagine the possibilities. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think that's so encouraging looking at it that way. And I think in our quest to transform society, it's very difficult to view it as, oh my goodness, there's still so much more and it's so demoralizing. So looking at it on the flip side is that actually causing excitement and fueling our passions even more is so encouraging. And I'll certainly take that away for today. But I also want to ask, I have observed that, yes, we are gaining traction and there's an evolution in society, especially when it comes to like emphasizing the importance and impact of representation instead of just plucking down like, you know, different looking people, because there's also like a diversity element, but there's also an inclusion, like getting a sense of belonging. How do we get that right and it not be a tick box exercise?
You see, I like what you've said because I have a publisher of mine. She's really awesome, and she's mentioned this, and it stayed with me. Where she was like, diversity is not just like painting, changing the color of the skin, and then the story stays the same, right? If you're really looking at diversity and bringing those stories forward, it's like, okay, you put it in the context of, let's say, if there's a particular skin color that you're presenting, you actually realize it's not just a skin color. There's more to it than the color of my skin. There's a story behind the people that you're wanting to represent. So when you personalize it like that, so I'm not just looking for brown-skinned kids in a story. I mean, I collected all these books to do show and tells, and I haven't been doing show and tells. So I'm not just looking for a brown-skinned boy in the cover, but this story, yes, I mentioned I'm a huge fan of cricket, and there is cricket in the story for sure. This boy becomes a cricket star, but his origin story is will tend to be quite specific to a group, to a certain background, right? So it's the origin story that makes it diverse. Otherwise, it could have been any other cricket story. But like, how did he come across cricket, and he started playing one game and it was close to cricket, and someone was like, oh, I know of a game called cricket, it's similar to this and I think you'd do well. So he was playing 3 turns. Try it out. So our origin story, we may meet at a certain place. Listen, as I say, even between me and Sena, our origin stories are not the same. And that backstory is what brings the diversity. It's not just a cricket story, you know? So if you had a person who was creating, black dolls, brown skinned dolls, then if you're really passionate about it, and really want to represent them in the most accurate way possible, then it's more than just like same doll, same production, I just painted brown. No, it's now wanting to understand. Maybe you go and sit with a black baby, right? I'm creating black baby doll. You actually go, someone in your team, whoever, R&D. Eh? So if you don't actually have a black person in R&D, because that's like your first choice is to actually have the person who can really speak to this. But it doesn't always happen like that. Let's say you don't have the person, right? So then if you don't have the person who knows, then either expose yourself somehow, actually sit with a black baby and look at the curls on their heads, like, then you have a better idea of what you actually need to do, or get the right people to advise you. I mean, is that so difficult? And that actually just makes your product better as well, more than anything. Get the origin story right. And yeah, you take it from R&D, you put it into production, whatever the next line is. And even that is part of a story. That's a story, because ultimately, yes, these are businesses and they need to sell. But even that, the journey you took to actually getting the doll, I mean, that is part of your story that you can even put on your marketing. Like, come on, make it work. But it's about being vested in, like having a vested interest in actually representing the people that you're wanting to represent.
I absolutely love the way you shared all of that. And in another life, I work within marketing research, and I feel like you've just solved the conundrum for us all. It really is about understanding the backstory and getting it right, so that you're creating true inclusion through diversity, rather than chasing diversity as a means in itself. So beautifully put. And I think Refiloe, your challenge is very clear to parents. It's saying you need to be intentional about encouraging diversity in the way that you raise your children, because the more we expose them to the same, the more they will come to expect the same, and expect that the world looks the same as the only things they have been exposed to. And that's a very real challenge to parents, and one that you have helped us with through your writing. So I want to thank you for sharing your insight and experience with us today. I think your dedication to promoting diversity and inclusion in children's literature is inspiring, and we as parents are grateful for the impact that your work has on our young minds. And we hope that this episode has shed light on the importance of the stories that we tell our children, but more importantly, the role that we as parents play in shaping their perceptions of the world.
Cool, and thank you so much, Refiloe, for coming on. It was a fantastic discussion. I can't even tell you. I echo Stacy's sentiment. Such an impactful and very important discussion. And we encourage all of you to subscribe to Colorful Podcast on Spotify, Apple, or YouTube, with episodes out every 2 weeks. Please rate us, comment, and share with your community so that we can keep the conversation going. Until next time.